I was in the middle of a quarterly review call with one of our biggest anchor tenants when my brother walked into my office like he owned the place. Because apparently, after 6 years of complete silence, that's exactly what he thought he did. I didn't hang up the call. I held up one finger, finished my sentence, and told the tenant I'd send the revised lease summary by end of day. Then I set my phone face down on the desk and looked at him. He hadn't changed much. A little heavier. Still wearing that same smug expression he'd perfected by the time he was 16. Standing behind him were my parents. My mother gripping her purse with both hands the way she always does when she's nervous but trying not to show it. And my father scanning my office like he was appraising it. Taking inventory. I said, "I have 12 minutes before my next call." My father said, "We need to talk about the company." That was the moment I knew exactly why they were there, and I also knew something they didn't. I'd been waiting for this for a very long time. My name doesn't matter as much as what I built. But for context, I'm 31 years old. I own a commercial property management company based out of Mississauga, Ontario, and I have been running it entirely on my own since I was 24. 12 properties under management, 41 tenants, a staff of 9. We specialize in mixed-use mid-market commercial buildings, the kind that keep small businesses alive, the kind that actually matter to a neighborhood. I started with nothing. That part is important because my family will tell a different version of that story if you let them. My father will say he provided the environment for my success. My mother will say she always believed in me. My brother will say he was too busy with his own ventures to get involved early on. None of that is true. What's true is that I took out a $60,000 student line of credit to get my real estate license and a property management certificate from Humber College. What's true is that I slept on my friend's pullout couch in Brampton for 14 months while I worked nights at a logistics company and spent every spare hour building my client list. What's true is that when I asked my father for a $15,000 loan to cover my first office lease deposit, not a gift, a loan, with a repayment schedule I'd written up myself, he told me it was a phase and that I should get a government job with a pension. My brother called my business plan a glorified landlord scheme. My mother said she just didn't want to see me get hurt. I stopped asking after that. I stopped calling as much. They interpreted that as me being dramatic. I interpreted it as self-preservation. By the time I signed my third property management contract, a 24-unit mixed retail and office building in Oakville, I had repaid my student line of credit, hired my first 2 staff, and hadn't spoken to my family in almost a year, not because I was punishing them, because I was busy building something real, and every conversation with them cost me 2 days of doubt I couldn't afford. Then I got the email. It was from my mother. Short, just 3 lines. She said my grandmother had passed, that the funeral was Saturday, and that it would mean a lot to everyone if I came. I went. Of course I went. My grandmother was the only person in my family who ever said, flatly and without conditions, that she was proud of me. At the reception after the service, my father pulled me aside and told me that I'd broken my mother's heart by not staying in touch. My brother didn't speak to me at all. His wife, I'd never met her before that day, looked at me with the particular polite curiosity people use when they've heard a version of you that doesn't match what's standing in front of them. I drove back to Mississauga that night and I didn't hear from any of them again for 6 years. Those 6 years were, without exaggeration, the most productive of my life. I won a regional property management award through the Greater Toronto Apartment Association, the commercial division equivalent. I expanded into Hamilton. I brought on an operations manager, a leasing coordinator, and a bookkeeper. I renegotiated 4 major anchor tenant leases and increased NOI on 2 of our buildings by over 30%. I bought a condo in Port Credit. I got a dog. I made friends who became family. I also, somewhere in year 4, started dating someone, a structural engineer named, and I realize I have to give him a name here. I'll call him what my staff called him behind his back, the good one. He was patient, direct, genuinely funny, and had the remarkable quality of never making me feel like my ambition was something he needed to manage. We weren't engaged yet when my family came back, but we were close. The first contact came not from my parents, but from my brother. A LinkedIn message, not even a personal email, LinkedIn. It said he was exploring some exciting opportunities in the real estate sector and thought it would be great to reconnect and potentially collaborate. I stared at that message for a long time. I did not respond. 3 weeks later, my mother called my cell number. I don't know how she still had it. I'd had the same number for 9 years. She cried within 40 seconds of me picking up. She said she missed me. She said the family had been through a hard time. She said my father's back had been bad and that my brother's investment venture, she didn't elaborate, hadn't worked out the way they'd hoped. I listened. I said I was glad she called. I said I was open to rebuilding slowly. I should have trusted that feeling in my stomach that knew exactly what slowly was going to mean to them. The visits started as dinners, polite, careful, slightly exhausting dinners at my parents' house in Treslington, where everyone pretended the previous 6 years were a minor scheduling conflict. My brother came to 2 of them. He'd put on a blazer. He talked a lot about the market in a way that suggested he'd recently discovered the word market. His wife, her name is something that rhymes with Serena, I'll just say that, smiled a great deal as in said very little. Then, about 2 months in, my father asked to see my office. I should have said no. I said yes because I was still, stupidly, hoping this could be something real. They came on a Thursday afternoon. My father walked around like he was doing a home inspection. He opened a filing cabinet, actually opened it, just to see what was inside. My mother asked one of my leasing coordinators how long she'd worked for me, and then said, in a tone that was clearly meant to be warm, but landed somewhere else entirely, she's always been the responsible one. My brother stood at the window overlooking the parking lot and said, you've done well for yourself. I said, thank you. He said, I've been thinking, there's a real opportunity here for the family to get involved. And there it was. I said, what do you mean involved? He turned around. He had clearly rehearsed this. He said that given the size of the company now, it would make sense to bring in a family partner, someone with a stake in the business, someone who could help with the vision side of things. He said he'd been researching the commercial real estate sector extensively. He said he thought a co-director role would be a natural fit. My father nodded along like this was a completely reasonable proposal being made by a completely reasonable person. I said, you don't have a real estate license. You don't have a property management certificate. You have no background in commercial leasing, tenant relations, building operations, or financial reporting. What exactly would a co-director role involve? My brother said, that's the beauty of it. I'd be on the strategic side. You handle the day-to-day. My mother said, it's a family business, sweetheart. I said, it's not a family business. I built it alone. My father said, and I want to be precise here because I've replayed this sentence many times, he said. You built it alone because we weren't given the chance to be part of it. I asked him to leave my office. They didn't leave quietly. My father said I was being territorial. My mother cried again. My brother said he was trying to help me and that I was making it weird. His wife, who had been sitting silently in the corner, stood up and put a hand on my mother's arm and gave me a look of such rehearsed sympathy that I had to look away. When they were gone, my operations manager knocked on my office door. She's been with me 5 years. She has seen a lot. She just set a cup of coffee on my desk and said, do you want me to update the building access list? I said yes. I said add a note that those 4 are not permitted on the premises without my explicit prior authorization. I went home that night and told my partner everything. He listened. He said, what do you want to do? I said I wanted to protect what I'd built. He said, then let's make sure it's protected. I called my lawyer the next morning. She specializes in small business and corporate law, and she's worked with me since year 2. I explained the situation. She said there was nothing legally actionable yet. No formal demand had been made, but that I should document everything and make sure my shareholder structure, which was all clean, was clearly formalized in writing. She also said, just be prepared. If they're coming back after 6 years, They usually come back with something specific in mind. She was right. The formal letter arrived 11 days later. It came through an email from an address I didn't recognize, attached as a PDF. And it was formatted like a legal document, but it wasn't one. It was a proposal. 5 pages. My brother had drafted it himself. I could tell because 3 words were misspelled and the paragraph spacing was inconsistent. The proposal requested a 30% equity stake in the company for my brother in exchange for his strategic oversight and brand development leadership. It also requested the consulting retainer of $4,500 to be paid to a numbered company, one he'd clearly just incorporated based on the registration date in the header. It referenced my grandmother's estate as a basis for family inheritance rights to the business, which made no legal sense whatsoever because my grandmother had nothing to do with my company and her estate, such as it was, had already been settled. At the bottom, my father had signed as a witness. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer with 3 words. Is this real? She called me within the hour. She said, this has no legal standing. But the fact that they sent it means they're either poorly advised or they're hoping you'll panic and negotiate. I said, what if I don't panic? She said, then we respond professionally and document everything that follows. What followed was a month of escalation that I was not expecting. My brother called my office line, the main number, listed publicly, and spoke to my leasing coordinator. He told her he was a company director and asked to be added to the tenant communication distribution list. She forwarded the call to me. I told him, calmly, that he held no position in the company and asked him not to contact my staff directly. He did it again 4 days later. Then he started showing up at one of our buildings in Oakville. Not my office, but one of the actual properties. He would stand in the lobby and introduce himself to tenants as part of the management team. 2 tenants emailed me to ask about the change in staffing. One of them, a physiotherapy clinic that had been with us since the beginning, said she was just checking because she wanted to make sure her lease renewal would be handled the same way it always had been. That email made my hands go cold. These were real people, real small business owners who had trusted me with their space, their livelihoods, their parking arrangements, and HVAC complaints, and lease renewal timelines. My brother was using them to apply pressure on me. He was walking into the spaces I had built and letting people wonder if something was changing. I drove to the Oakville building myself the next time he showed up. My property supervisor had texted me a heads up. I walked into the lobby and he was there, chatting with the owner of the insurance brokerage on the main floor. He saw me and his expression did something complicated. Surprise, then recovery, then something that tried to look confident. I said very quietly, so the tenant wouldn't hear, this is your last warning. If you come here again, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. He said, you can't do that. This is a commercial building. I said, that I manage. Get out. He left. The insurance broker looked between us and said, everything okay? I said yes, and I meant it because by then I had already done what needed to be done. Here is the thing about my family's plan. It depended entirely on me being someone I used to be. The girl who apologized to smooth things over. The one who absorbed the cost of everyone else's comfort. They came back after 6 years because they needed something, and they assumed, based on 7 years of accurate observation, that I would eventually give it to them to make the noise stop. They didn't know about the documentation. They didn't know that from the moment my brother sent that proposal, I had kept records of every call, every visit, every email, every interaction with my staff and my tenants, timestamped, saved in 3 locations. My lawyer had copies. They didn't know that I had spoken with a commercial litigation specialist, a referral from my corporate lawyer, who had reviewed the conduct around the Oakville building visits and confirmed that continued interference with my tenant relationships could constitute tortious interference with economic relations, which under Ontario law is actionable. They didn't know that I had reached out, carefully and privately, to 2 of my longest-standing tenants, the physiotherapy clinic and a financial planning firm that had been with me since year 1, and explained the situation honestly. Both of them sent me written confirmations that they considered their management relationship to be with my company, with me specifically, and that any third-party representation not authorized by me in writing was not recognized by them. And they absolutely did not know about the property. In year 5, I had quietly purchased a small commercial building in Hamilton outright, not under my company's name, under a holding company I'd set up separately. It was the asset I was most proud of. Clean, no outside investors, no partners, and completely invisible to anyone who ran a basic search on my main operating company. I mention this because my brother's proposal had included, in the third page, a reference to future asset acquisitions being subject to the equity arrangement he was proposing. He didn't know what he was trying to claim. He was swinging at shadows. I let the situation sit for exactly 3 weeks after the Oakville confrontation. Then my lawyer sent a formal response to the proposal, a 3-page letter that addressed each point with the precision of someone who has read a lot of bad proposals and knows exactly how to dismantle them. It noted the lack of legal basis for any claim on the business. It noted the documented instances of misrepresentation to tenants and staff. It noted that continued interference would result in formal legal action. It also included, as an attachment, a cease and desist notice related specifically to the building visits and the misrepresentation of his role to my tenants. My father called me the same day the letter arrived. He didn't yell. That surprised me. He just sounded tired. He said, "Did you have to involve lawyers?" I said, "You sent me a formal proposal." I responded formally. He said, "This isn't what families," I said. "I agree." He said, "Your brother is struggling. He needs something to believe in right now." I said, "That's not my responsibility to fix." There was a long silence. He said, "Your grandmother would be disappointed." And that one hit because he knew it would. My grandmother had been the one who told me to be generous, to not let money make me hard, to remember that family was family even when it was difficult. I thought about her for a moment. Then I said, "She also told me that people who respect you don't need to take from you." She said that to me when I was 19, and she was the only one in the room who thought I could do something real with my life. He didn't say anything after that. The cease and desist worked. My brother stopped appearing at the properties. The calls to my staff stopped. 2 months passed. Then my mother sent an email, not a proposal, not a demand, just an email. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. She said she was sorry for how things had gone. She said she hoped we could find a way back to each other that didn't involve lawyers. I read it several times, the way I read anything from my family now, looking for what's underneath the surface, waiting to find the catch. I didn't find one. I wrote back. I said I was open to rebuilding a relationship. I said it had to be on terms that were clear. I would not be discussing the business. I would not be considering any involvement for any family member, and any future contact with my staff or tenants would end the conversation permanently. I said I hoped she understood that these weren't punishments. They were just the conditions under which I could trust. She said she understood. I don't know yet if that's true. We've had 2 dinners since then. Just the 2 of us, at a neutral restaurant in Oakville, and she paid both times without being asked. She's talked about her garden and a book club she joined. She hasn't mentioned the business once. That might be progress. I'm taking it slowly. My brother and I have not spoken. I think that's probably the right outcome for now. My father sent me a card on my birthday. Just a card, nothing inside except his signature and my mother's. And I put it on the windowsill in my office and then moved it when it started to feel like it was watching me. Last month, I finalized the purchase of a second building in Hamilton. This one's bigger, a mixed-use property with retail on the ground floor and professional offices above, anchor tenanted by dental and a regional accounting firm. I signed the papers on a Wednesday afternoon, and when I walked out of the notary's office into a February afternoon that was colder than any reasonable person should tolerate, I stood on the sidewalk for a minute and just felt it. The weight of a thing you built yourself. The specific quiet of knowing no one can take credit for it. My operations manager had sent flowers to the office with a card that said, "Building 2 of many." My partner had taken the afternoon off work and was waiting for me with dinner reservations at a place we'd been trying to get into for months. And somewhere in Burlington, my family were living their lives. Maybe talking about me. Maybe not. It didn't matter the way it used to. I'd stopped needing them to understand. I didn't need them to witness it or validate it or apologize properly enough for me to fully exhale. I had built something real. I had protected it, and I had done it, every single step on my own terms. The women in my life, my operations manager, my leasing coordinator, my lawyer, my grandmother's voice still somewhere in the back of my head, they were the ones who showed up, not with proposals, not with equity demands, just with coffee on hard days and flowers on good ones. That's the family that matters, and the company is doing just fine.